reflect interest.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Monochronical, polychronical.
Right. Okay, so I'll hold the poll now. Let's see how much you remember about it. So I launched the poll, which says Uzbek culture tends to, oh, I made a mistake, so it should be tends to be what type? Monochronic or polychronic, collectivistic or individual, hierarchical, egalitarian, low context or high context. Choose as many as applicable. Yes, Mahigul?
Examples you mean, yes?
No, can you see the poll?
Oh.
Yeah, first just decide on the tab. Are you using your phone? Do you see the poll? So 2 people answered. I'm waiting for others, just a couple more minutes. Mahigul, have you voted? Yusuf? Oh, disappeared. Oh, people disappeared. Okay, so I'll stop the poll. So yes, the 2 people voted. So had 2 people said this is polychronic culture, right? What does that mean? Guli, can you comment? Why you chose polychronic? What does that mean?
It was a mistake. It should be monochronic because for us time is not unlimited. It's usually we are late. It was a mistake.
No, it is polychronic. You're right. Yes. Okay, yeah, thank you. So hierarchical and not egalitarian, right? So, Mahigul, can you give example? Why do you think Uzbek culture tends to be hierarchical?
Because Uzbek people refer to their family, to people by their titles. That's why it's hierarchical. And they treat it as their according to their understanding.
According to the understanding of what? Their social status, right? According to their power, what we say in other terms in cultural studies, we say like power, in terms of power, right? So we treat people depending on how much authority they have, right? It might depend, it might be their age, it might be their social status, right? So whether they are a parent or let's say like your uncle, right? So like if they have social status, or can be economic status, whether they are kind of well off or from low income, right? Or position, right, in a job place, whether it's a boss or not. Right. Okay, great. And the next thing is high context or low context. So you chose, let me see, yeah, high context.
The meaning of this the word, you mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? Yes, can you give example?
Okay, high context, it's directness here is the main thing, and of course it is so rude, can be seen rude to other people, and but in low context it is face-to-face conversation. It is.
Well, in high context, people don't do face-to-face communication.
May I add?
Yes, Guli.
Okay, Uzbek people mostly love to speak indirectly, very polite, in a very polite way, because they afraid of to. I don't know how to explain, but mostly we are afraid of to tell something in a directly.
Yes. Yes. So
we've talked to
yes, to understand the meaning, so you have to know the context. There are lots of implied meaning, right? So they don't say something directly, right? Tend to, right? So for example, we were saying if they say choyge killing, they do not necessarily mean that they're inviting you to their house, right? Whereas in other cultures, so they accept that directly, right? So like if you're saying, so you really mean it, right? So yeah, of course, this depends also on the subcultures, right? Whether like younger people might be kind of tend to be low context, right? Whereas elder people high context, or whether it depends who you are talking to, right? Whether this person is again older than you or has a higher position than you, right? Or like, you know, the people who are in-laws, right? So like khudalar, so right, so you talk to them a bit differently than to your own sister, for example, right? So it depends on these kind of relationships as well. Good. Good that we could. Sorry, I cannot change my screen. Seems I'll have to. Okay, good. Any questions regarding last week's
No.
lecture? Everything is okay. Good. Can we move on then? Today we'll talk about language and culture, because it's just we're coming, you know, we started with culture, right? And we started discovering so far, talking about that cultures. When we mean culture, it's a very broad definition, right? Can be not only kind of big cultures, but can be individual cultures as well. Then we talked about different barriers, right, for communication, like stereotypes, bias, prejudice, and others. Then we talked about types of cultures, right, that help us to kind of categorize big cultures, right? And now today we'll talk about language and culture, because the course is called Intercultural Communication, right? So the means of communication is language, right? So then we'll see how they are related. Do you think language and culture are related?
Of course.
How?
As we mentioned now, Uzbek explain something in a polite way, and it's our culture. Because of our culture, because of our tradition, and I don't think that all European people can be like this. And it's also their culture. They would like to be with person. They don't pretend to be best for others. They just be themselves.
Okay, but how is this one how this relates to language?
Language. Because in order to explain our perception and our ideas, we use language.
Okay. Thank you. Mahigul, what do you think? So how language and culture are related?
I think that, for example, at first, if we, for example, say the word language, it like points out to a specific group, yes, of people, the nation. And for example, if we interact with another language, and it means that we are also interacting with the culture that speaks with this language.
Okay.
And for example, we cannot understand, for example, their culture, yes, without learning their language.
Okay, good. Can you learn a language without learning their culture?
What? Can you learn?
Can you learn a language without learning the culture of the speakers?
It's connected, I mean.
So you're learning
with
English, right?
And...
Okay, you're learning English.
Yes.
Possible.
Whose culture do you learn about?
English culture, of course.
What do you mean by English culture?
British people.
British, yeah, but
English
English-speaking country.
Some of American.
Well, English is the official language of many countries. Yeah, it's in the UK, USA, Canada, Australia, Ireland, right? So I think South Africa. And then in many countries, it's the second official language. For example, India, Malaysia. Right. So yeah, I think English is nowadays is a bit different, kind of has a different status, because the English that you are taught now is considered to be the international language. Nowadays, English is not the anymore the language of, we don't regard it as the language of Great Britain or the language of USA, right? It's in the means of international communication, right? So therefore, you can learn about different cultures, right? And it is, I think, English is the most nowadays kind of the global language, right? Um, and therefore nowadays they encourage learning about different cultures because there in the world there are more that non-native speakers of English rather than native speakers. So nowadays English is the language of everyone, right? For example, an Uzbek talking to a guest from Korea, so you speak in English, right? It's the language, it's not your native language, it's not his or her native language, right? But you use it for
Yes.
kind of international communication, right? So, and when you're talking to a person from Korea, right, so you take into consideration his Korean culture, right, not English culture, right? So there are many things that are connected, with English languages probably has a different status nowadays. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Language and culture are interrelated, and they cannot be separated.
And by, for example, culture, we mean their, for example, traditions. If we interest in that language, we should interest to their traditions, to their habits, yes, to their daily life, of course.
Yes, right. Yes, because yes, when we learn a language, we usually learn about different cultures. Yeah, depending, of course, right? So it's easier when the languages are restricted to one culture. For example, right, Uzbek language, right? So it is heavily connected with only Uzbek culture, right? Not like other, or there are in some parts of Afghanistan, people speak also Uzbek. Afghani Uzbeks, they also have a dialect of Uzbek language, but majority of people who speak Uzbek live in Uzbekistan, right?
Yes.
Um, so therefore, like to understand a language, right, we need first of all the context of situation, right? What's happening right now, right? So if I say your like Sahiba is cannot enter the room, right? If you don't know that we are on Zoom, for example, online, right? So like that you cannot enter this Zoom room, right? But if out of this context, it might be like maybe which room, right? Maybe you might understand this is classroom, right? So why she cannot, right? So you understand the context, right? So to understand some language, right, some message, you have to understand the context of situation, right? But also context of culture, right? So to understand something, you have to understand the culture. Can you think of any example that some message that you need to understand culture? For example, in Uzbek, oshke borasizmi, let's say, right? So if you know the culture, right, you understand that probably somebody's wedding or some event, right? And then you're invited there, so you're right. But if you just translate it word for word, and then for the person who doesn't know that culture, right, maybe what does it mean, right? So maybe just asking you, like inviting you for dinner or to eat osh, right? Right, or like you have that lots of from like Hojiboy Tojiboyev's these anecdotes, right? So this when he like talks about it, literally translates some Uzbek words, right? Or like Oshtakorum Madis, right? So like, what does that mean, right? So if for a person who doesn't know that culture, will not
Yes.
be able to understand, right? So you need a context of culture to understand the message. Can you think of any other example?
Yeah. Or for example, like Alisher Navoyni Uqdizmi. Yes. It is by these women that their his books. Can it be as an example?
Well, this is metonymy, right? What you're referring to, and it exists in all culture, in all languages. Metonymy, right? Well, if I'm English speaker, right? But then say, have you read Navai? Then I would understand. So probably, even if I don't know Navai, right? I would say, okay, that's probably some author, right? So I would understand that.
Understand.
Right. So this one is more kind of some cultural traditions and connected with those that do not exist in other languages. Hello, guys. Sahiba, Tajibaeva. Who's Tajibaeva?
Malika.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Okay, great. So if you can think of, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on. So when kind of cultures come up with some new ideas, they develop some words, right? So they develop ways how to express that phenomena, right? But also, like in the last, let's say, decade in Uzbek language, do you know any words, the new words that appeared to describe new things?
For example, what kind of words? What kind of words?
Any new words, like let's say Zoom, for example, zooming, right? So now it appeared this, right? So it's a new word, right? So like Zoominar or saying, right, zooming, right? Because of this quarantine, right? Like this new word came up, right? To describe the new phenomena, right? It's now became the global culture, right? But are there anything specific to Uzbek culture that appeared?
Yes, for example, it should be new. Yes, you mean
some new words.
Maybe planchette also is new. Planchette.
Okay. The word. Yes. Yes.
But you are asking about Uzbek words, yeah?
Well, I don't, I was also thinking whether planchette is Uzbek word or not, but I think there is no other way of saying that in Uzbek, right? Yeah, it's like you say like plakat, so planchette, planchette. It would be the same, yeah, of course, right? So yeah.
For example, monitor.
Yes.
With words we can't, for example, we don't say as in the past Zangor ekran, yes, like this.
Yes. Yeah, although I don't know how many years for the word monitor, maybe more than 20, but yes. Yeah.
Film, the word film also.
Is it a new word?
No, it's not.
Yeah, film, I don't know, at least 50 years, right?
Blogger, we have a new word.
Blogger, yes. Yes, blogger. I think, yes, that's a good one. Yeah.
And Imho also was well known last 2 years. In my humble opinion, bloggers use this phrase. Different word, but it's also mostly used.
Okay. Yeah, but they are saying like, yeah, these are mainly English, right? So the kind of global culture, right? Yes. But yeah, you can think of something that specifically refers to Uzbek culture as well, right? And then, so if something appears, then we try to kind of find a word or a phrase to express that, right? But the reverse is also true. So that means the other side is sometimes the language limits whether we can express something or not, right? So for example, in Uzbek culture, so this became like "marry me," right? I see it when I go to Uzbekistan. So it became the tradition of holding these "marry me" events, right? And they put it in English everywhere, right? So like "marry me," right? So there is no kind of words to describe that process in Uzbek, right? Because it's not part of the Uzbek culture, right? So therefore, so there's a limitation, and then like they probably took that as it is, right? Or the same, the word blogger, right? So there is no word in the Uzbek language to describe that process, so they just adopt that language. Yeah. There is a very famous hypothesis about when we say about language and culture, and you read, so they all mention this. So this is the fundamental work in language and culture relationships. These were two American linguists, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Worf, and they always like say Sapir-Whorf hypothesis or Sapir-Whorf theory. So what they were saying, so they came up with kind of two things, mainly linguistic determinism and linguistic relativity. So the there are two things. So they're saying, on the one hand, language is part of culture, right? Because like when we remember, like we talked about, what do you mean culture, right? You mentioned, for example, clothes, food, right? Dances, and many things, and language as well, right? So language is part of culture, right? Of a big culture. But on the other hand, culture is part of the language, right? It is reflected in the culture is reflected in the language, right? So these are kind of, therefore, these kind of two things that are interrelated. Different people speak differently because they think differently, and they think differently because their language offers them differently. So saying like, depending on what is your L1, right? First of all, right, you think a bit differently than others. And therefore, if you remember, there is a famous quote saying, how many languages you know, the more languages you know, the more person you are, or something like that, right? So like, if you know like 5 languages, that means you have like 5, you are 5 person, right? Kind of, because yeah, your brain works a bit differently when you know a language, because you look at the world from the prism of that, from the perspective of that language, right? So how many languages do you speak?
How many? Uzbek, Tajik, Russian, English, Turkish.
Wow.
5 languages.
Great. Yes. Do you feel you think a little bit differently when you speak this or that language?
Um, only when I speak in Uzbek.
So when you speak in Uzbek, what
Because,
happens?
for example, I am from Bukhara, and in Tashkent, for example, I cannot speak with. I speak with with my Bukhara accent
Mm-hmm.
in Uzbek,
Yes. So.
and it is differently. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting point, right?
for
So even
example,
the dialect, right? Even dialects, right? So you kind of
yes,
shift this
yes,
dialect. Yes. And I always admire people from the regions who can like shift these dialects. I said, how do you do
yes.
that, right? So like people who are born like in Tashkent, usually they just speak one dialect, that's it, right? So, but from other some regions, they have very different dialects, right? Khorasan, for
Yes.
example, right? And Bukhara, it's
Mm-hmm.
also noticeable dialects, right? So then that is
Uh-huh.
shift, to kind of standard Uzbek or like Tashkent dialect, right? That's really, yeah, that's really interesting. And do you feel you think or you behave a bit different when you shift this?
Yes, of course, it affects
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because I want to speak as them,
mm-hmm.
and but I can't this. But if, for example, it will appear by practice, of course, and
Mm-hmm.
we must practice with somebody in order to speak as them. But I have
Mm-hmm.
no practice.
Yes, okay.
Because near me only friends which they also speak in Tajik and with
Mm-hmm.
accents
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good.
like this.
Yes, sure. It is true about any language, right? So the more you practice, the more kind of fluent you are, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you think a bit
Yeah.
different. I remember like I used to have two um, Russian friends when I used to live in Uzbekistan. We were course mates and we were very close friends for a long time. And then they would always admire, like say, when I started, when I used to speak Uzbek to other Uzbek people, and then she was saying, "Oh, you even look so different. You like when you switch, into Uzbek and then Russian, you start
Uh-huh.
thinking differently, right? So the same, like also like people when they used to send their kids to Russian speaking school, right? They notice some behavioral changes or the
Yes.
changes in their thinking, right? So
Mhm.
because the child goes to a Russian speaking school, for example, right? So yeah, the language influences the way we think
Yes.
and behave. Okay.
Mm.
Therefore, and still now I think, right, saying like, oh, I used to go to like Russian school, right? So kind of then you
Mm.
expect that the person is a bit different than the
Yes.
person
You're right.
who used to attend Uzbek school, right? So
Yes.
or the person like um, um, my kids, for example, they study in English,
Mm-hmm.
and although they are Uzbek, but of course, language influences, so their thinking is different from children who live in Uzbekistan, right? Yeah. Or it might also be different from other people here in Canada. So, because they are still Uzbeks, right? So it's all kind of interrelated. There was one experiment kind of trying to prove that language influences our thinking. Now it's difficult to prove that, right? Although it's kind of, yeah, we all understand that, right? But kind of in terms of research, right, proving that's difficult. There was one research saying about this Russian language, right? So in Russian, we have words like голубой and синий, right? In English, both of them are blue, right? Can be dark blue, can be light blue, right? But it's still blue, right? It's only one blue, right? Whereas in, as we said, in Russian, there are two distinct words, right? Голубой and синий. And so they did this experiment. So the task was, there are these, you have to match these squares, these three squares, to the colors at the top. And the experiment showed that the Russian speaking people, they did this much faster than speakers of other languages. You know, because they have that in their language, it's easier for them to do that. You see, they even kind of differentiate colors better than others, right?
Yes.
When like other cultures, like English, so they don't have that. So they say it took them kind of longer to figure out to do this, right? Then when I think about this experiment, I also think about Uzbek. I wonder, yeah, how they will do that. Because in Uzbek, so we have a great confusion with this cook, right? What does it mean? Is it green or blue?
Yes.
It seems like, I don't know, Uzbeks cannot differentiate color. They cannot differentiate between blue and green. I don't know. And I don't know, like I heard that people wrote about it, but I don't know whether like you could try to decipher the why we have that confusion, right? So because Coke chai, right? So it's green tea, or Coke course, green tea, green ice, right? But Coke Osman, so it's not green now, right? It's blue sky, right?
Kokatlar also.
Kokatlar, yes. Coke Soldima, so this is green, right? But yeah, but in other times, it's Coke is well, in the standard Uzbek, it's Coke is blue, right? When you say that it's translated, Coke is blue, is you teach that, right? Yeah. Any other examples when we Coke is a blue? Yeah, Coke koylek, right? So this would mean blue, right? Oh, well, that's interesting. How would you understand, right? Coke koylek, would you understand this is green or blue, right? It's this confusion exists, and I don't know whether people cannot differentiate these colors, or they were, I don't know the reason. Yeah, but this kind of these colors also, yeah, they are, even colors are cultural, right? So there are lots of research on that as well, and what words languages have to describe colors. Right, so because they are not the same, right? So another, I think, yeah, what about this thinking, I would say about numbers as well. Even numbers are kind of, I always admire French language. If you know French, some French, I think they are very good at math. I don't know, like for example, to say if you want to say like 80 in French, you have to say 4 times 20. It's yes, 80 would be 80. So that means 4 times 20, literally means like that. There is no other word to say just one word 80. You have to say 4 times 20. I said, wow, that's already kind of math, right? So or if it is up to 80, like above 60, you have to say 60 plus. For example, 72 would be 60 plus 12. there is no one word saying 72, but it would be 72. So 60 is 60, douze means 12. 60 and 12, right? So that's interesting, right? How like languages they define how they think. Okay, so there are different kind of vocabulary that are kind of describe these relationships, language and culture, right? One of the things is cultural encodings, right? So they depending on their experience, they come up with different words. For example, in Uzbek, we have word oyok, right? And everything from hip till the end means oyok, right?
Ah, yes.
Whereas in English, so there are different words. So hip, leg, and foot, right?
Yes.
So languages and cultures, right? I don't know why. So in English like that, so they decided they have kind of more words, right? Or in Uzbek, we have lots of words to describe relationships, right? Like we have amake, toga, well, uncle, right? So there are different ways you can translate this, right? So it can be amake, can be toga, can be poche, right? So, pardon me?
Aunt also. Hola, ama.
Aunt, yes, aunt can be khole, amma, kinaya, opok, right? So can be many other words, right? And we have specific words for each relationship, right? Or even the word brother or sister, right? We have to define whether it's ukia or akia, right? So yeah, we have that differentiation, right? So why do you think we have those?
To differentiate the people from each other.
Yes. So it's probably because that's in Uzbek culture, it is very important, right? These relationships are really important, right? And as we said, we're collectivistic culture. We have kind of strong family relationships, right? And because it's tend to be the hierarchical culture, right? So everyone should know his or her place, right? Kind of status in the family, right? So this is Hola, this is Toga, so this is Kenaya, and this is Ukia, this is Akia, right? So this is power, right? Because age gives the power, right? So depending on that, we treat people a bit differently, right? So in weddings, they get different gifts based on their status, right? So things like that, right? So because it's cultural, therefore we have those words in our language, right? These things are not that important in English cultures, right? So Anglo-Saxon cultures, so therefore they don't have those words. Right? And therefore sometimes these are the words that make it a bit difficult to translate, right? All these, when they are kind of connected with culture, that's what makes it difficult, right? So you have to, like, if it is brother, you have to say, like, there is a famous novel by Theodore Dreiser, Sister Carrie. And then, like, how would you translate it? Single Carrie or Carrie Opera, right?
Right.
Right. So and it was actually her name, if you read the novel in English. So her Sister Carrie was that she for some time she used to be a nun, in the church, and they call each other like sister. So then how would you translate that, right? So we don't have that, right? So yeah. Nowadays I think people call it brother, right? When they are kind of sisters or brothers in the religion, right? In Islam. But we don't have that. And in Uzbek, we don't have the words, right, that would describe this kind of relationships in the religion, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Other words that encode culture, and I think these are the most, right? So the brightest words that kind of show the culture are they're called realia, right? So these are the words that describe the things that they exist only in that culture, right? So for example, Japan, so you cannot translate it, right?
Yes.
Because they don't have that. It's only to these Uzbek and Central Asian maybe culture, right? Or doppe, right? Or osh, right? Palov, right? Or here in Canada, we have poutine. So this is type of the food. Or and yeah, even if it is like, the doesn't mean only the why I put these last two, the Canadianisms. So even if it is the language, right, but it has, depending on the dialects, right, or the as you were saying, for example, in Bukhara, probably you have some words that people from other regions do not understand, right, because you have some things that the things that do not exist in other provinces, right, in other regions. For example, Putin, so not everybody might understand, even if they speak English, right? Or like we have double double here in Canada, the phrase saying double double. Of course, like people in US or in UK will not understand it, although they are also speakers of English, right? So double double here in Canada means it's coffee. It's type of coffee when you put double serving of sugar and double serving of cream. Double cream, like double yeah. So it's a kind of a coffee culture, right? And everybody drinks. So there is a famous like Starbucks in the US, right? So here in Canada we have a chain, Tim Hortons, and yeah, everybody goes there, and they are in every corner, they're everywhere, and then the people go and say double double, give me double double, and they immediately understand what you mean. Yes. Do you know
But
any
Rabbi,
yes.
we have also kind of words like Suzanna, Beşiktaş,
Yes. Right.
Beşik,
Yes.
Mallara.
Yes.
It's associated with our culture.
Oh, yes, of course. And to add this, for example, our national instruments, yes, dutor, tor, like this.
Yes. 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 Right. Yes, exactly. Things that exist, and yeah, can be costumes, can be musical instruments, cuisine, right? Food. Yes, some customs, as you said, some traditions. Oral toy, for example, right? Not toy, right? Yeah. And how would you translate these?
What?
How would you translate these words to a foreigner?
We didn't.
Cannot.
We don't translate it. We only define that
Yes,
word.
explain, right? Explain.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So we use what's called like descriptive method of translation, right? When we just explain what it is, right? Yeah, and but when if it is written translation, right? You may use the transcription or transliteration, right? You just write as it is, and then you just give a note, right, in the description. Sometimes you may decide, and different. Okay, I'll talk about it later. Okay. Other language specific or the words that show how the languages reflect culture are called concepts. Concepts are can be universal, but even universal concepts might be interpreted a bit differently in different languages. For example, even they say the word love or success, right, might have different kind of connotation, might have different meanings in different cultures. Or like dusha and soul, they say they are not the same, right? Kind of, or Uzbek John, right? What does that mean, John, right? Where is it? So there are lots of research on that. You know, for example, dusha ushla v pятки, right? So it means it goes kind of moves in your body, right? They think like that, right? So in Uzbek, yes, Johnny Chaktas, right? So we have that, but still, what is it, right? What is John? Or other concepts, right? So yeah, the same concept might have different meanings. Or there are very culture specific concepts that do not exist in other cultures. So in Russian, so the word a voice. So a voice is not only the word, right? It's kind of different, but it's a whole concept, right? So which doesn't exist in other languages. Or we say hayo, ibo hayo, right? So this word you cannot translate it, right, first of all, but also it's not only the word, right, because it's the whole concept, right, what it means. We also see the culture in different symbols and images, right? So symbols, for example, you know, the cross is a symbol of Christianity. The moon and the crescent is the symbol of Islam, right? Or, you know, the bald eagle is the symbol of the United States, for example, right? So there might be, yeah, the symbols, kind of cultural symbols, right? Religious symbols or other things. But also they kind of the images that they use in different similes, in metaphors, in phrases, right? For example, as hungry as a wolf, right? What would you say in Uzbek? Would you use
ittek aç.
Burada açma.
ittik, right? Yeah, we don't usually say borde, we say ittik, right? So as hungry as a dog, right? So, or like this, take this one, as poor as a church mouse, right? So this is very cultural, right? Because we don't have church, right? And like nobody would say "Shqande Kambagal," nobody would say that, right? So, and we would use other kind of images to describe those, right? Or
Eşek tek adam we have. Not horse, but eşek tek.
Eshektek, exactly, right? As tight as a donkey. Yes, so in English language, it will not be kind of clear, right? What you mean, right? Because they don't have kind of probably that much donkeys that they probably didn't use donkeys as a means of transportation, right? As a means of, right, yeah. Or colors that we talked about, right? As greedy as green. So green is associated with greediness in English. We don't have that in Uzbek, right? So the greedy means kızغанчыk. So how would you say that? Kızغанчыk, and not only, what do we say? Zıqna. Yes, I think that's a good word. Yes, zıqna. Right. So you see different languages depending from their culture, they choose these or that images and symbols. And they are also, the context specific, right? So, for example, we have donkeys, as we were saying, we used to use them even now, right, to carry stuff, right, and then as a means of transportation. So they don't have that in other languages, right? Or there are cultures probably who they've never seen donkeys, right? So then, of course, they will not use that image, right? depending on the animals or on the geographical location of that culture, they use the images, right? Or like ok paktadik, right? We usually use say as white as a cotton, right? Not all languages would use that, right? Or in English they would say as white as snow, but in African cultures, of course, they will not use that image, right? Because they don't have snow, right? So they would use some other images to describe that, right? Or some animals the animals that we don't know, right? We don't use them, right? In our these kind of phrases, images, symbols, right? Or to describe beauty, right? What images they use. Like oidik, use oidik, right? Like a moon, right? Whereas like in English, like moon, so it's usually associated, it's not associated with beauty, is associated even with insanity, like, yeah, they choose different images and symbols. Yeah, another thing that reflects, yeah, those were the kind of words, right? But we look at the higher level, like kind of grammatical structures, syntactical structures. So they also differ, right? Not only words reflect culture, right? So politeness, right? Degree of politeness. In Middle East, or like they would say, so that I notice here as well, people who come from in Middle East, lots of Arabs, they would use this imperative, bring me some coffee, or like do this, something like that. It's okay in their language, right? But in English, it sounds very rude, right? It's considered to be impolite. You have to use more polite ways, right? Saying, would you mind getting me a coffee? Could you do this photocopying for me? Right? So, and there are different degrees of politeness in English as well, right? If, for example, could is considered to be more polite than can. If I say, can you do photocopying for me? And then could you do this? So could would be like I'm trying to be more polite, right? So depending can. What about Uzbek? Do you think how polite we are? It doesn't mean that in Middle Eastern they are not polite. No, they find different other ways of expressing politeness. Okay. Yeah, what do you think in Uzbek? How do we express politeness?
Mostly use iltimos or karşı emas mısınız? Mumkin mi? But not all people use this word.
Yes, you see, it's not in the Uzbek, right? So, but we have some grammatical structures to use that. For example, kofi olipkil or opkivar, right? So they're different, right? Kofi opki and kofi opkivar. They sound different, right? Opkivar is more polite than just opki, right? Olipkil and then olipkil well, that's a question, right? But clean and boring, for example, right? So
bera olasız mı? Tuzunu bera olasız mı?
Beri boring, bering, and beri boring, right? Right, exactly, right? So we have these kind of grammar structures to express that politeness, right? There is a difference, right? Or we use this lar, right? For example, kilde lar, right?
Ah,
So, for
yes.
example, even if it refers to one person, right?
The respect for that person.
Exactly.
Hurmat.
When we show the respect, when we want to sound polite, we use, yes, lar, even if it refers to one person, right?
Yes.
And then, yeah, you said we don't say those, right? So in English, yes, there they say, like, if you have to know at least 3 words in English to survive in English-speaking countries, right? Saying thank you, sorry, and please, right? So these are the 3 words that you have to use all the time, right? So if you don't use them, you're considered to be impolite. I remember once when we were in the UK, I did my master's degree in the UK, and once we were in a train with my husband, and he wanted to like pass, what to go through, and there was a guy standing, British guy, and he said, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I think he said, can I go through? So he didn't say please. He said, can I go through? Something like that. And then he looked at him and said, if you ask me nicely. And he was really offended because he didn't use, please, So like, whereas this happens when they translate like just literally from their language, right?
Yes.
Otkitai, right? For example, in Uzbek, you would say Otkiti, right? For example, right?
Some
Otkhuzwar, right? Otkhuzwar, right? You would say, like, you would not say iltimas Otkhuzwar. You would, like, men especially, right? To men, they would not say, iltimas Otkhuzwar. That's awesome. Yeah, Otkiti, right? Or like Otkhuzwar, right? Qach, Yoldan Qach. Yeah, they may even say that, right? Depending on, and he was a young guy, so yeah, so he was really kind of, he said that very straight. He looked at it and he said, like, if you ask me nicely, and I said, what happened? Yeah, because they didn't say, he didn't say please, so therefore he was really offended. Yeah. And yeah, you have to say this sorry. And here in Canada, yeah, Canadians are very friendly, so yeah, you do something like wrong, so both people would say sorry, like if you bump into each other, right? So both sides would say sorry. So, things like that. Yes, how often. But it doesn't mean that Uzbek language or other languages are not polite, right? So they find different other ways of expressing that politeness, okay? Therefore, yeah, shouldn't say like, British or American Canadians are more polite, right? So it's just, yeah. Although there are cultures kind of seem to be more polite than others. Also, yeah, depends on the power relationships, right? But we were talking about these hierarchical cultures, right? So depending on their power, we tend to choose the words or the phrases that we use, right? So like to a person who is younger than ours, right? So we would probably kind of be more direct, right? And to people who have higher power, then we might choose to be more polite.
Right.
And then if you remember, like, depends on the gender as well sometimes, right? So women probably, they tend to use more polite structures than men, right?
Yeah.
Depends, right? Okay, so
Yes.
I think that's enough for today. We'll continue next time. It's already time. I have another class. Yeah, any questions? So think about, as a homework, think about, yeah, the words or concepts, or how like culture reflects, is reflected in the Uzbek language.
Okay.
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 Thanks for listening, Adrapa.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you for coming. Yes, I have 2 loyal students, Mahigul and Guli. Right. Thank you, Malika, as well, for coming.
Thank you, teacher. Bugun yana ham qiziq darslarda yana bittasi bo'ldi bugun.
Thank you, Rahman.
Thank you. See you later.
So yes, don't wait, Madina, to remind you. Yes, so remind yourself in the group. So next Monday, 7:30 p.m. Okay, same link. Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay. Bye.